There are all kinds of things of significance in the swamp at this point. We are finding bits and pieces in there from a ship. So is there a ship in the swamp, or are there bits of a ship in the swamp that were used for other things? We haven't got an answer to that yet.
For more than 200 years, Oak Island has hidden its greatest secret beneath the water, and nobody has ever proven that it actually exists. Today, that may change. A scanning device has locked onto something buried beneath the swamp, and its shape matches the hull of a ship almost perfectly. And this isn't the first time that same shape has appeared in this exact location. This is the highest it's gone so far. Let's see. Look at that. Look at it. It just keeps rising. Huge spike here. Big spike. Now add a centuries-old coin, a damaged ship's axe, and a piece of iron connected to a theory that is 40 years old, and one unbelievable question suddenly becomes possible. Could a hidden treasure ship really be sitting beneath Oak Island right now? Stay with us. You're about to find out. The axe, the coin, and the first clue. Oak Island has attracted treasure hunters, engineers, and skeptics for more than 2 centuries, ever since the first reports of a strange depression appeared on this small stretch of Nova Scotia coastline. Generation after generation of searchers have spent money, brought in equipment, and dedicated years of their lives to an island surrounded by a mystery that refuses to be solved or forgotten. Every season introduces new technology, fresh theories, and additional pieces of evidence. This time, all 3 arrive together, and by the end, the story looks very different from how it began. On Lot 15, just northeast of the Money Pit, archaeologists Laird Niven, Aaron Taylor, and David McInnes are carefully excavating a 16th century pine tar kiln. This structure may have produced the same tar used to seal the timbers of the Money Pit itself. Centuries ago, pine tar was among the most valuable materials available to shipbuilders. It waterproofed gaps, protected ropes, and helped prevent wooden ships from breaking down at sea. If this kiln was actually constructed to support shipbuilding or excavation activity on Oak Island, then the island's mystery could reach much further back than most people have ever suggested. This quiet piece of ground, easy to overlook without a second thought, could actually be one of the most significant locations on the entire island. There has to be another coin or something around here, Gary. I know there is, mate. There's something right there, mate. You'll have to dig it out. The kiln itself is being uncovered slowly and carefully. Every layer of soil must be recorded, measured, and compared with everything the team has already discovered about how a structure like this would have been constructed and used. It isn't the kind of discovery that immediately makes headlines. Instead, it is the kind of find that can quietly change the timeline everyone believed they understood. And that is exactly why what happens next, only a short distance away, could be so important. The archaeologists working on the kiln aren't treasure hunters looking for a quick discovery. They are piecing together a timeline one careful layer at a time, trying to establish not only what this structure was, but also who built it and when. That kind of investigation takes time, and it rarely delivers one dramatic moment. Instead, it creates a foundation that every other discovery on this lot has to be compared against, including anything the metal detectors may uncover nearby. Not far away, metal detecting expert Gary Drayton and researcher Jack Begley bring in the OKM EXP 6000, a deep scanning device designed to detect buried metal, underground voids, and even tunnels several feet beneath the surface. Their objective is simple: scan the area around the kiln and find out whether anything else is hidden beneath the ground. As the scanner moves across the soil, the display begins filling with different colors. Green represents normal background signals, nothing unusual or concerning. But red and orange indicate something much more interesting: ferrous material, meaning iron buried beneath the surface in considerable amounts. Then, mixed in with all that iron, another type of signal appears. It's non-ferrous. For a treasure hunter like Gary, that immediately raises the possibility of gold, silver, or coins. But they aren't going to dig up every signal they find. Instead, Gary switches to the CTX 3030, a much more precise metal detector, and one that already has a history on Oak Island. This is the same detector that previously helped uncover a 700-year-old lead cross at Smith's Cove. That discovery changed the team's ideas about who could have visited Oak Island centuries ago, potentially long before the period traditionally associated with the island's mystery. This time, Gary isn't looking for random signals. He wants something precise. He wants another piece of the puzzle. Look at that! How old? Oh my gosh, that is really old. This is the kind of thing I would expect to find in Europe. When I first saw it, I thought it looked medieval. Like a medieval cross. It doesn't take long before the detector gives off a strong, continuous signal, directing Gary toward a very specific spot. He immediately gets down and begins digging, moving with the confidence of someone who has done this countless times, but still gets excited every time the ground gives up something unexpected. What emerges isn't a coin. It's heavier, darker, and curved, with a shape that instantly suggests both age and purpose. It's an axe, broken, but clearly very old. Its weight and condition suggest that it has spent centuries buried beneath the soil, slowly corroding and gradually becoming part of the surrounding landscape. In maritime terms, the object is known as a ship's rigging axe. Sailors once carried tools like this on deck for emergencies, particularly when heavy ropes needed to be cut quickly. It could be used to free a tangled line, release an anchor in an emergency, or cut away part of a sail before it pulled a vessel into danger. But that raises an obvious question. Why would a ship's tool be buried this far inland, in the middle of the island, and nowhere near open water? Gary has a straightforward theory, and it could change how the other discoveries in this area are understood. Imagine arriving on the island centuries ago and needing to move quickly from the beach through thick forest and dense vegetation. You wouldn't necessarily have a machete with you. You might have something exactly like this. A rigging axe could easily serve as a tool for clearing a path through the wilderness. It was heavy enough to cut through vines and branches, and sharp enough to make quick work of dense vegetation. And that makes the discovery even more interesting. Think about what it could mean. A blade originally designed to help sailors escape danger aboard a ship has now been found buried along a route leading toward a kiln that may have been connected to shipbuilding and the production of tar. The two discoveries may be completely unrelated, or they could be pieces of the same much larger story. Someone came ashore here with a clear purpose. They moved inland from the coastline and made their way toward this exact area for a reason. And whatever brought them here happened long before the Oak Island mystery ever had a name. The heavy corrosion covering the axe strongly suggests that it could predate the famous discovery of the money pit in 1795. That means it may have been here before the legend began, before generations of treasure hunters arrived, and before the story most people associate with Oak Island even existed. It's worth taking a moment to understand how unusual a discovery like this really is. Metal detecting on Oak Island often produces modern debris, nails, pieces of wire, and all kinds of scattered material left behind by more than 2 centuries of digging with both hand tools and machinery. But an object this old, this distinctive, and so clearly connected to maritime activity isn't something you would expect to find on an ordinary afternoon. It suggests that someone, hundreds of years ago, walked across this exact stretch of land for a specific reason. But the team doesn't stop after finding the axe. They continue scanning the area, refusing to focus on just one discovery. Then the detector gives a different signal, cleaner, sharper, and more precise. This time, it sounds like something smaller. And more importantly, it doesn't appear to be iron. Gary starts digging once again. What comes out of the soil immediately catches his attention. It's a small, uneven coin with rough edges. Unlike modern machine-made coins, this one appears to have been struck by hand. Faint decorative markings can still be seen around its edge, although centuries underground have worn away much of the detail. Then there's another feature that makes it especially unusual. There is a square hole punched directly through the center. Even with dirt covering the surface, the shape is unmistakable. Gary doesn't clean the coin right there. Even though there may be a strong temptation to scrub away the dirt, doing so could destroy the original patina and remove valuable evidence that experts may need to properly identify and date the object. Instead, he carefully examines its shape, turning it in the light and studying every visible detail. European coins from this period generally weren't made in this particular style. The square hole, the uneven edges, and the imperfections created by hand striking all seem to point somewhere else. Something outside the usual European explanation for Oak Island. Gary's initial impression is that the coin may not be European at all. Without laboratory testing, he can only make an educated estimate, but based on its appearance, he places it somewhere around the 1600s or 1700s. That is a particularly interesting period because it falls within the time frame when some researchers believe treasure, or possibly an entire treasure vessel, could have been hidden on the island. And a coin like this probably didn't arrive here by itself. Coins transported across an ocean centuries ago would normally have been part of something larger. A purse, a chest, a shipment of goods, or the contents of a ship's hold. It seems less likely that a coin like this was simply dropped by accident on an otherwise empty section of coastline. If the coin really did come from somewhere outside Europe, then an important question remains unanswered. How did it reach Oak Island? And what else might have arrived with it? It's a tiny object, easy to ignore, and easy to mistake for a random piece of corroded metal if you don't recognize what you're seeing. But here, just a short distance from the rigging axe and the pine tar kiln, its importance could be much greater. 3 separate discoveries have now appeared within the same small area, and all 3 seem to point toward one surprising possibility. People were already here, working and moving through this landscape with a specific purpose, long before the official Oak Island story ever began. That kind of pattern is difficult to dismiss as pure coincidence. This coin is very, very old, and I don't believe it's European. This coin is from somewhere much more exotic. Before we continue, if you want to follow every new discovery as it happens, make sure you subscribe. Because from this point forward, the story only gets stranger. The ring bolts and the ghost of a ship. A larger team gathers along the eastern edge of the swamp. Rick Lagina, historian Doug Crowell, Gary Drayton, and surveyor Steve Guptill are all here. This time, they're not looking for coins or ship tools. They're searching for something much harder to locate. Iron ring bolts that may no longer even be visible, buried inside or beneath large boulders that have remained untouched for decades. The swamp has always held a unique place in the Oak Island mystery. Unlike the money pit, which has been dug, searched, flooded, and investigated for more than 2 centuries, the swamp has remained mostly undisturbed. For generations, it was simply a quiet and overlooked part of the island, an area that many researchers didn't consider particularly important. That changed when Fred Nolan began paying close attention to it. The story goes back to 1969, when the late Fred Nolan claimed he discovered several iron ring bolts driven directly into boulders along the eastern side of the swamp. Then, only days later, Fred made another discovery that surprised even him. He uncovered pieces of what appeared to be a large wooden sailing ship from inside the swamp itself. There were scuppers, sections of a mast, and other wooden fragments that were difficult to explain. How had parts of a large sailing vessel ended up buried inside a wetland? Mr. Nolan did find some ship parts there, and his ideas are now being supported because we're finding items connected to ships. When Fred put those discoveries together, he reached a bold conclusion. He believed the iron rings had once been used to secure a treasure galleon in place. He also suspected that the swamp wasn't entirely natural. According to his theory, the area had been deliberately constructed or altered to conceal a ship from view. That makes the ring bolts extremely important to the team's current investigation. Fred didn't simply locate them and move on. He recorded their positions and used them as reference points for a larger system of measurements and alignments. Those measurements reportedly guided him toward other possible discoveries around Oak Island. Fred eventually removed the original ring bolts decades ago and took them with him. But his son, Tom Nolan, has now given Rick information that the team can't simply ignore. Tom believes there could still be another ring bolt somewhere in the same general area where his father once searched. Using old records and known reference points, Steve calculates an approximate search area. The team then spreads out along the edge of the swamp, concentrating on large boulders that could realistically have been used to anchor something extremely heavy. Gary begins scanning the ground in a careful, systematic pattern, moving from one large stone to another. Almost immediately, the detector responds. There's a strong iron signal, appearing to come from roughly 8 or 9 inches beneath the surface. Gary starts digging slowly and carefully. He knows that whatever is buried down there deserves patience rather than speed. Large boulders are scattered throughout this part of the swamp. Some are natural remnants of the landscape, shaped by glaciers thousands of years ago, while others could potentially have been moved or altered by human hands. Figuring out the difference between a naturally positioned stone and one that was deliberately placed or modified is what makes this search so difficult. Finding a large rock isn't enough. It has to be the right large rock. But when the object finally breaks free from the surrounding dirt, it isn't a ring bolt. The object is flat, cast, and surprisingly heavy for something that has supposedly spent centuries underground. Its weight immediately suggests that it isn't just modern scrap metal accidentally left behind. Gary turns the piece over and examines it closely. He notices a curved edge on one side and a flat section where it appears to have been mounted. He quickly identifies it as a piece of an old cast iron stove, or possibly part of a cooking pot. It looks like the kind of fragment that may once have belonged to the front section of a potbelly-style stove. Doug recognizes the detail almost immediately because he's heard a very similar story before, directly from Fred Nolan himself many years ago. Fred had previously discovered stove fragments just uphill from this location, and specifically described them as belonging to a ship's stove. Now, standing only a short distance from the swamp, Doug has little trouble considering the possibility that this newly discovered piece also came from a vessel, and there's an important reason why that detail matters so much. Back in 1981, while surveying his own property, Fred discovered 6 enormous boulders arranged in a distinctive pattern. That formation eventually became known as Nolan's Cross, one of the most controversial and heavily debated stone formations on Oak Island. Fred believed the boulders could potentially be markers for buried treasure. He excavated beneath several of them, but no treasure was found. What he did uncover, however, were pieces of an iron stove. Later research suggested that those fragments may have come from a 17th century galleon. If the fragment found today belongs to that same vessel, or even a similar ship, then the discovery becomes much harder to dismiss as random. It starts to look like a pattern. Ring bolts, pieces of stove iron, fragments of a mast, and a stone road running through the swamp, something that seems difficult to explain in the middle of a wetland. All of these clues appear to point toward one increasingly difficult possibility, that a ship may have been deliberately concealed beneath this landscape centuries ago. Nolan's Cross has confused and fascinated researchers for decades. 6 large boulders are positioned with enough spacing and apparent order that some believe the arrangement is too deliberate to simply be the result of natural glacial activity. Skeptics have challenged that interpretation for years, and the question of how the formation came to exist remains unresolved. But every new piece of ship-related iron discovered near these boulders makes the natural explanation a little more difficult to accept. The team agrees that the newly recovered fragment must undergo expert metallurgical testing before any definite conclusions can be reached. Even so, the larger implication is difficult to overlook, and everyone standing beside the swamp understands what it could mean. The team came out looking for one specific piece of the mystery, the ring bolts. Instead, they may have uncovered another important piece of the story. And that leads to an obvious question. If a discovery this significant can emerge from only a few hours of searching, what else could still be buried beneath the ground? No one on the team is willing to simply call this a coincidence. Fred Nolan spent decades convinced that the swamp contained the key to Oak Island's mystery, long before many other researchers were prepared to seriously consider the idea. Every piece of iron recovered from this ground adds another piece of evidence to the case he began building largely on his own, armed with little more than a shovel and an unwavering determination to find an answer. The machine that sees beneath the ground. Back at the research center, Marty Lagina, his son Alex, and Craig Tester meet with geoscientist Jeremy Church and Burton Cosgrove. With the reconstruction of the garden shaft currently on hold and new discoveries continuing to appear in other parts of Oak Island, the team now has a chance to shift its attention to a different area, one that could finally help answer a question they've been investigating for years. Jeremy introduces a new piece of equipment called the EM31-8. It's a near-production prototype based on ground conductivity technology that has been used in different forms for decades. But this version has been refined to provide much greater accuracy and detail. The device can measure underground conductivity to a depth of around 30 feet. Buried metal can produce a strong and obvious response, but that's not all it can detect. Disturbed ground, buried foundations, old structural remains, and other large underground anomalies can also appear on the readings. These are the kinds of clues that an ordinary metal detector wouldn't be capable of identifying on its own. Technology like this has completely changed the way the team can investigate Oak Island. Earlier searchers had to depend heavily on shovels, dowsing rods, maps, and educated guesses. With equipment like the EM31-8, the team can survey large areas much faster and identify the locations where future excavation may have the greatest chance of success, before anyone even puts a shovel into the ground. The technology doesn't eliminate the need for hands-on excavation. Instead, it helps the team focus that work where it matters most. It doesn't take long for everyone to agree on the first location they want to scan: the swamp. From a practical standpoint, the timing is good. The weather is warm enough to work comfortably, but it's still early enough in the season that the notorious Oak Island insects haven't become a major problem. But there's a much more important reason the swamp has everyone's attention. It's connected to an anomaly the team has been thinking about for years. In 2018, a seismic survey carried out by Jeremy's team detected something buried beneath the swamp. The shape appeared remarkably similar to a ship roughly 200 feet long. At the time, the team tried to investigate the anomaly through direct excavation. The attempt didn't provide the confirmation they were hoping for. The results were inconclusive, leaving the team with more questions than answers. Now, this new machine could offer another opportunity. With greater resolution and deeper scanning capability, the EM31-8 may be able to provide a clearer picture of what is actually beneath the swamp. The objective is obvious from the beginning, and nobody needs much convincing. If the swamp really does contain an important part of Oak Island's centuries-old mystery, and the people gathered here strongly believe that it does, then this scan could be one of the fastest and least destructive ways to investigate the theory. The process doesn't require digging. It doesn't require disturbing the ground. And if the equipment identifies a genuine target, those results could become the basis for something much larger, a formal application for permits to drain portions of the swamp and investigate whatever has been concealed beneath the surface. For a team that has spent years dealing with the limitations of older surveying methods, the EM31-8 offers something significantly different. Earlier scans could indicate that something might be buried below. This new equipment could potentially tell them much more clearly what the anomaly looks like and approximately how deep it is located. That difference could be extremely important. Before the team can move forward with excavation, they may need permits, funding, and approval from regulators. Convincing authorities that part of a protected wetland should be drained would require strong evidence. Detailed data could provide exactly that. It could turn a theory that has existed for decades into a practical investigation plan. The swamp answers. Later that afternoon, diver Tony Sampson joins Craig, Alex, Jeremy, and Burton at the edge of the swamp. They're ready to put the new equipment through its first serious test. The plan sounds simple when explained. Actually carrying it out, however, is going to be much more difficult. The team runs the EM31-8 across the swamp using a tight and carefully measured grid, covering the water with overlapping passes. Every line matters. If the boat misses even a small section, there's a chance the equipment could completely miss an important target. Instead of using a motor, which could create inconsistent movement and cause the scan lines to drift, Tony pulls the boat through the water by hand. Nothing beats human power, he explains, especially when the goal is to maintain a perfectly straight and repeatable path across open water. Precision is more important here than almost anywhere else on Oak Island. The swamp isn't stable ground. It's soft, waterlogged, and uneven, making it much easier for a buried anomaly to remain hidden between scan lines that aren't properly spaced. That's why the team needs such a tight grid. It's the only way to be confident that something important hasn't been overlooked. The EM31-8 measures underground conductivity and can detect the magnetic signatures of buried metal and structures to a depth of around 30 feet. The information collected during the survey will eventually require several weeks of careful processing before it can be turned into a detailed three-dimensional map showing possible targets beneath the swamp. But the team doesn't have to wait weeks to see the first signs. The initial readings appear on the screen in real time. The boat slowly moves along the first planned line, steady and deliberate. For a while, the machine remains quiet, showing only normal background readings. Then, everything changes. The signal suddenly spikes. This isn't a small, isolated blip that can easily be dismissed as background noise. Instead, the display shows an enormous response stretching across a significant section of the reading. And the location makes the result even more interesting. The signal appears almost directly over the same area where Jeremy's team previously identified the 200-foot ship-shaped anomaly years earlier, using completely different technology and a separate scanning method. Two different machines. Years apart. The same location, and apparently the same general shape. The boat continues forward, following the next line of the grid. Then the equipment produces another strong response, this time only a short distance from the first. Jeremy takes a moment to process what the results could mean. Over the years, almost every time the team has investigated the swamp directly, they've uncovered something significant. There's the mysterious stone road that seems difficult to explain in the middle of a wetland. There are wooden fragments that have been carbon dated to periods separated by centuries. And now, twice during the same afternoon, the team has received strong and independent evidence suggesting that something large and metallic could be sitting beneath the exact area where a ship-shaped anomaly was previously detected. If the team wants to finally solve this part of the Oak Island mystery, they may have no choice but to fully investigate the swamp. For years, the swamp has been the one area they could study from a distance but couldn't completely access. Every fragment recovered around its edges has suggested that something much larger could be hidden just beyond reach, buried beneath water and layers of mud that are extremely difficult to penetrate with ordinary excavation equipment. The new readings don't solve every mystery, but they provide something almost as important. They show the team where its resources should be focused next. They also provide regulators with concrete and repeatable data that could make a future permit application far more realistic. An axe designed to help sailors clear their way from a ship, a strange coin from an unexpected origin, and a stove fragment that appears to connect with a galleon theory that has been developing for decades. Together, these discoveries are creating a pattern that the team can no longer easily ignore. And now, two separate scans carried out years apart are pointing towards the exact same shape beneath the water. This may be the closest the swamp has ever come to revealing what it's been hiding. The team isn't simply following an old legend anymore. They're standing directly over the evidence. None of these discoveries, taken individually, would be enough to completely rewrite the story of Oak Island. But when they are brought together, all from the same day and across 3 different areas of the island, they create something much more difficult to dismiss. A pattern keeps appearing, and no matter which direction the team investigates, the clues seem to point toward the same possibility. A ship came here. Something was hidden. And for the first time in years, the evidence is beginning to line up with the legend. If you want to be here when the team finally uncovers the truth, subscribe now, because the next discovery could be the one that changes everything.